Hello again and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave, and in this video we're going to be revisiting this Telecaster a little bit, particularly the bridge. I did a video recently where I showed you the process of upgrading the bridge saddles on this Tele to compensate its saddles to improve the intonation, and I thought it's probably worth just doing a full in-depth video about intonation, what it is, why it's important that you have your intonation set right on a guitar, and just basically explain in a bit more detail why compensated saddles were a good choice for this Telecaster. Start off with a term you may have heard of, that's scale length. When we talk about the scale length of a guitar, what we're talking about is the distance between where the string leaves the nut down here to where it passes over the bridge saddles here. And the scale length, you might hear things like the Fender scale length or the Gibson scale length. Those are just kind of shorthands for particular scale lengths that Gibson or Fender prefer to use. Fender scale length is 25.5 inch generally, so that means a distance of 25.5 inches from where the string passes over the nut to where it passes over the saddles. Gibson on the other hand is 24.75 inches, so slightly shorter. That means the gaps between the frets are slightly short, slightly smaller all the way up the neck, because you've got 24.75 inches between the nut and the saddle. Like I say, you will see Fender, it's not a hard and fast rule, you will see Fenders with non-25.5 inch scale length, but as general shorthand, if you hear someone's talking about Fender, they mean 25.5, or Gibson 24.75. PRS generally standardise on about 25 inch scale length, but say there's no hard and fast rule, and one's not necessarily better than another. It's a little bit of personal taste for how they feel. We talk about scale length as being a distance, a measurement, like say, let's say, because I'm playing a Fender here, 25.5 inches from there to there. But if you take a look at any guitar bridge, it's maybe not quite so obvious on this Telecaster, but if you have a look at a close-up shot of something like my Stratocaster there, those saddles are staggered. So we'll tend to talk about the scale length as being like a nominal scale length. So what it really we're getting at is, when we say 25.5 inches, it's in the ballpark of 25.5 inches, but certain individual strings might be a wee bit shorter or maybe a wee bit longer because we've adjusted the intonation. What intonation is, if you think about getting a guitar in tune, you're tuning the open strings to a particular note. So I tune my E string to an E. That string is then in tune. Setting the intonation is about fine-tuning the length of the string. I like to think of it as being the string is in tune with itself because of all sorts of things to do with physics and the way the guitar's tuned and the way strings vibrate and all that sort of stuff. It's difficult to have all of the strings like perfectly in tune with a set length, and we need to fettle it a little bit. So when we set the intonation, what we're doing, the method that we use is we play a note that's based on the open string, and we play the same note based upon the 12th fret, and they should be exactly an octave apart. You could do it by playing, say, an open string and a fretted note at the 12th, or you could play a 12th fret harmonic and the fretted note at the 12th. Personally, I find the harmonic and the fretted note is an easier pair because you are actually hearing exactly the same note rather than the open string and the fretted note being like an octave apart. So getting what you do is you get the guitar in tune perfectly, play the open string or the 12th fret harmonic, compare it to the fretted note, and you probably notice if you're using if you've got a tuner that does strobe mode, like my TC electronic polytune has normal tuner mode and strobe mode. Strobe mode's a lot more useful for this, where you're making very, very fine adjustments, hundredths of a semitone. You use your tuner, and when you compare that fretted note with the harmonic or the octave, you need to make a judgment about whether the fretted note is sharp or flat. If the fretted note is sharp, so that means you need to do is you need to lengthen the string, so between the 12th fret and the bridge. So you would tighten the screw on the saddle, pull the saddle back, and make the string slightly longer. Because if you think about a longer string, gives you a lower note. So if that fretted note compared to the harmonic, if that fretted note is too high, you need it to be lower. Lengthening the string will change that. So you would lengthen the string, which will knock the string out of tune the string back up to pitch, compare the fretted note and the harmonic, or the fretted note and the open string again, and just keep repeating it. Conversely, if you do that comparison and the fretted note is too low, then you need to shorten the string. Kind of makes sense. Shortening a string makes it higher. So you would turn the adjustment screw on the saddle the other way, shorten the string, tune up, compare, and keep repeating that until the fretted note and the open string on the harmonic are exactly the same. We're talking like fractions of a semitone out, but it's enough to make it sound out of tune when you're playing. It's just that little, the fretted note that you're playing will be just that little bit out. So you do that across all 6 strings. Setting the intonation gets your guitar basically in tune with it, in tune with itself. It'll still be slightly out, to be honest, particularly on the higher strings. It's not a fault in your guitar necessarily, but almost certainly isn't a fault with your guitar. It's just, unless the frets have been put in the wrong place. Just the way the guitar works, you'll find that chords like D, the D chord, or like a, chords that are around the 2nd, 3rd fret on the top strings, they will, if you look at those notes very, very precisely, with like stroke tuner, you will notice that they do seem out. You might say, well, I've got my intonation set right, the open string's in tune, the fretted notes, the 12th is in tune. Some of the fretted notes down this end of the neck still sound out. It's just the way the guitar works, but by getting the intonation set right, you get that as kind of as close as you can get it. I have heard of guitarists who favour actually tuning the open string slightly out. So rather than tuning it exactly to an E, you would tune it like just 2 or 3 semitones sharp or 2 or 3 semitones flat, and that kind of compensates for that little bit of intonation error. And then there's had a formula for how many hundredths of a semitone, how many cents out each string needs to be sharp or flat. So maybe I can't remember exactly the formula, but it's like 2 cents up, 3 cents up, maybe 4 cents too low, that sort of thing. And kind of on average, the guitar seems a bit more in tune with itself. I don't bother with that. I tune the strings up exactly to pitch, have the intonation set right, and it's good enough. When you come to set the intonation, the example I'm using here is like my Telecaster bridge, where you've got screws in here going up to the saddles, and as you turn the screws, the spring will push the saddle away, or you turn the screw the other way, it'll pull the saddle back. Something similar on a Stratocaster. There's other ways of doing it on something like a Gibson, like my Les Paul over there. The bridge is you've got that separate bridge, but within the bridge you've got saddles that move backwards and forwards. On something like a Floyd Rose, it's a bit more of an engineering job, because you've got to loosen the saddle blocks off, move them backwards and forwards, and clamp them down again. That's probably all of the video about setting up a Floyd Rose. But what I'm getting at is there will be a way on your electric guitar to set the intonation. I say on your electric guitar, it's not something you see so much on acoustic guitars. Generally, acoustic guitars will have a fixed bridge, and you just kind of have to live with it. Generally speaking, once you've got the intonation set on your guitar, it's there. As long as you've got the guitar in tune, the intonation will be right. Where you might need to think about changing it is if the guitar's had some really significant change. The main thing is if you change from a lighter gauge string to a heavy gauge string, or vice versa, the way the string vibrates will be a little bit different, and that can make the intonation go out. So if you do a string gauge change, definitely you want to look at checking the intonation. It's the sort of thing generally you would do as part of a guitar setup, but I wouldn't expect to need to change it particularly often. It's only if you've had some significant sort of change with the guitar. And setting the intonation generally is one of the last things that you do in a setup. You get other aspects of the guitar right, the neck relief set right, get the action set right, get the nut height set right, all of that sort of stuff. Get it once it's pretty much there, get it in tune, and then one of the last things you do is check the intonation, because all those other factors will affect the intonation. If you adjust the truss rod to give yourself a little bit more, a little bit less relief in the neck, then that changes things and it will affect the intonation. So that's why you would do the intonation check and set at towards the end of the setup process. There's a couple of other factors that will affect your guitar's ability to be in tune with itself. Really to do with the height of the strings off the fretboard, what we call the action, what the distance is between the frets and the strings. And that could be affected by the height of the bridge, or the height of the saddles down this end, or it could be affected by the height of the nut slots. Everybody has their own preference for how high or how low they like the action. Personally, I don't like super low. I remember getting a guitar set up one time by a tech, and he was really proud of himself. He said, "Yeah, this is the lowest action you're ever going to get on a Gibson SG," and he was right. It was a wonderful action. It was so low, it was so easy to play, but just not quite to my preference. And when I got the guitar home, screwdriver went into the bridge, and I cranked it up just a fraction to get the strings a little bit higher. But even when we talk about high action, the strings shouldn't be like massive distance off the frets, because what will happen is when you push if you've got the strings perfectly in tune, and then you push the string down against the fret, if you think about it, you're not just setting the length of the string, you're kind of squeezing it down. As the string goes down towards the fret, you're putting a wee bit more tension on it. Similarly, if the guitar is in tune, but you've got a really high nut, if the string's coming off, if the nut hasn't been cut properly and the strings are too high, when you push the strings down, it's going to push them way past where they should be for the fretted note. And no matter how in tune your open note is, how correct you've got your intonation, the guitar's still going to be out of tune with itself. So it's important to make sure that you've got the nut slots cut to the right sort of depth, and you've got the bridge at the right sort of height, so you've got a good usable action that's not too high, so you're not going to be squeezing the strings out of tune. And then one of the last things that you do as part of the setup process is open string or 12th fret harmonic compared against the fretted note, and they should be exactly the same, and you would just fine tune that in, like I was saying, by shortening or lengthening the string at the bridge. Okay, so there's a quick introduction to intonation, what it is, why it's important that you set it. It's one of those things you can do it yourself. All you need is a screwdriver and a decent tuner. You don't need specialist tools. If you're not going to threaten the guitar, things like adjusting the truss rod, that's one of those things you always have to say, if you're not really sure what you're doing, leave it to the professionals, because over tightening a truss rod or something like that, you can cause a bit of damage to the guitar. Intonation, it's no worse than tuning your guitar. As long as you make sure you don't slip with the screwdriver and damage the guitar's finish, then as long as you know what it is you're trying to achieve, you've got a decent tuner and a decent set of strings on there, which you've got in tune, you can set the intonation. So make sure that you do. Otherwise, when you're playing, you might be playing a solo against somebody who's playing a series of chords. If the one guitar's perfectly in tune, but your intonation's slightly out, then as the further up you go, up the neck you go, you're going to be playing notes that are just slightly out from what the fretted note is. They won't harmonize perfectly with the underlying chords, and it'll just sound a bit wrong. If you're playing jazz or something that's very harmonically complex, where like the right note really matters, in intonation is particularly important. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. If you did, please click the like button down there. If you really found it useful, really enjoyed it, and you want to see other videos that I post on the channel, then please click the subscribe button, which is also down there, and click the bell icon next to it so you get notified of any new videos that I post onto the channel. You're welcome to leave a comment. I don't always see comments that are left on videos, though YouTube's a bit rubbish at notifying me. So if you've got something specific that you want to ask me, whether it's about guitar playing, music theory, guitar gear, anything at all, you're better off going here, fill that form in. That way the question comes direct to me and I can get around to answering your question in a future video. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.